Hey guys, this is Eckhart's Letter. Hello and welcome to another Star Wars video. So, if you've only just watched the Clone Wars, or even read some of the mainline Star Wars comics or books set in that time frame, you might very reasonably believe that the Republic and the CIS basically only used Vanators and Providences in the ships that we commonly see on screen. However, there is substantial lore detailing the use of other Republic and Separatist capital ships. Today, we'll be examining that lore in detail and looking specifically at some of the largest vessels that you might not know exist. Now, some you might, and that will be the case with the first batch of ships, which I'll call early Imperial vessels. And yes, towards the end of the Clone Wars, the Republic actually made use of ships which would much more commonly be associated with the Empire. Even the Imperial class Star Destroyer actually debuted under a Republic insignia, although at that time it was called the Imperator. The Imperial one would basically just be the Imperator, and we also see the Republic use the Tech Door, which is an Imperial Star Destroyer without hangar space, but with additional armor and weaponry. The same goes for the Victory and a ton of smaller ships that don't really warrant discussion in today's video. However, we can actually move up from the Star Destroyer class of vessels and look at larger ships which saw service in the Imperial Navy and did so in the Republic Navy. However, instead of looking at Imperial designs that debuted during the Clone Wars, we'll actually be looking at pre-Clone Wars designs which turned out to be so popular that they were adopted in one form or another under the Empire. And obviously this is a fairly limited class of ships, given the fact that we're talking about vessels that were extremely powerful but designed before the Clone Wars, i.e. in a Ruusan Reformation era. But as I've discussed, we did see Kuat drive yards during this time, making some really powerful ships. On the smaller side, we have something like the Procurator battlecruiser. Although there's been no official art, I think Fractal Sponge does a good job of capturing the ship as it's described, and the Procurator was a 2.5 kilometer long battlecruiser that mostly served as an advertising piece within the Kuat defense fleet. It's unclear exactly how these were used, but they would have been fairly old during the time of the Clone Wars, so it's very likely that they were retrofitted, and because of their power and size, would have been limited to defending key planets like those in the core. However, the Procurator has more interesting cousins, I'd guess, and I'm talking specifically about the later designed Praetor class battlecruiser and the Mandator dreadnought. So both of these ship types were designed before the Clone Wars, but when war broke out, they received significant upgrades. Praetors sometimes were used to lead Republic battle groups, which sort of matches how we'd see the Empire later use the Praetor too. However, I think the more notable vessel of this era would be the Mandator class dreadnought. The Mandator was 8 kilometers long, and before the start of the Clone Wars would have probably been the most powerful ship of its time. Although because of this power and the rules against warship construction at that time, it would have had a very limited, if not non-existent hyperdrive, basically limiting it to the Kuwati sector. The Clone Wars saw not only several Mandator 1s updated for service, but also the new Mandator 2, which was more heavily armed, armored, and of course had a better hyperdrive installed without needing to be upgraded. The Mandator 2 probably was still the most powerful warship of this era, and I think even with the ion weapon powered, it could probably stand up to a subjugator class heavy cruiser. Probably the least well-known ship of this era would be the Maelstrom class battlecruiser, and when I searched on YouTube, all I could find about this ship was a video that I did and a very cool recreation of my design for the Maelstrom, which was made in Space Engineers by a user called Lone Rebel 06, and I'll link to that down below. So the Maelstrom appears only in an FFG RPG source guide, so not only is it of very low canon status, but it doesn't even have an associated image, which is why Lone Rebel's design is based on my admittedly pretty crappy drawing. But as a battlecruiser, obviously would have been very large. It's supposed to have been very expensive to run, but one also did see some service within the Rebel Alliance, which is pretty wild. I'm hoping future FFG content, whether Legends or canon, somehow fleshes out this ship, because I think the idea of another battlecruiser for the Republic is pretty cool, especially one without the sort of pre-war design history. And I think that would be the case with the Maelstrom, because it's sort of described somewhat like a Venator, it's got these double command towers, and I don't know, it would just be cool to learn more, even if we don't see it in any major content. The last thing I'll mention is that the Republic would have also used a bunch of older pre-war vessels like the Invincible class, and I think that's more in the ballpark of Corey Loses, and I'll link to both his gaming channel where you can see him play as some of those ships in his mod Fall of the Republic for Star Wars Empire at War, and also his lore channel, because I think he'll probably cover some of them in the future. Also, the New Republic's navy would have been supplemented by many private system fleets, basically planets that raised their own defenses. It's very possible that some of these had very large ships, albeit with Rus on limits. I think that'd be a cool topic for another video, by the way, but really here your imagination is the only thing limiting you. Let's now move to the CIS, and the first ship I want to look at is the Subjugator class heavy cruiser. And I know most of you are saying, we all saw the episode of the Clone Wars featuring the Malevolence, the Separatist superweapon, and a Subjugator class heavy cruiser. And while that is true, the Malevolence was not the only Subjugator. The Malevolence had at least one sister ship and possibly a few more, and they all seem to have the same ion weapons, although perhaps with different configurations, which I think is interesting. Staying on the topic of little details about well understood ships, some people also don't recognize that both the Providence and the Recusant, both mainline CIS capital ships, had both standard and large size variants. We see the large Recusant, for example, quite clearly during the Clone Wars. While an ordinary Recusant is less than 1,200 meters long, we can see that the Dreadnought variant, which sits at 2.5 kilometers plus, is vastly larger than a Venator class Star Destroyer. We also have the Bulwark line, and I've covered one of these ships specifically in a dedicated video. There is some confusion because there's technically 3 Bulwark types. I don't think it's really clear which ones would have been around during the Clone Wars, so I'll just refer you guys to that video. However, the Bulwark ranged from either 1 kilometers in the Bulwark Mark 1 to 2.5 with the Bulwark 3, and basically served as a hammer against the Republic, with actually a fleet of these causing serious damage. And with that, I think I've covered all of my bases here. I hope you guys learned some interesting information about the unseen giants fighting behind the scenes in the Clone Wars. I think it would be really cool if Star Wars Legends had more openly embraced some of this stuff, but part of it comes from the fact that many of the ships were creations of the Essential Guide to Warfare or RPG guides, and I guess authors just didn't have time to do so because of the late release of the Essential Guide to Warfare, or prefer to stick with more commonly well-known ships. But let me know what you think. Let me know which one of the vessels discussed today is your favorite. And if you like this video, consider liking, turning notifications on, subscribing, and just doing all of that good stuff. Before we leave, however, we do have a hashtag AskGek question of the day that I'd like to get to. Keeping sort of on topic, Whiskey asks, because the original seasons of the Clone Wars are considered both canon and legends, could we assume that this new upcoming season is the same? The problem is that it will conflict with the original Clone Wars cartoon that preceded it, and you guys get the idea. And no, Clone Wars Season 7 is not Legends material, it is canon only. And I think this is sort of illustrative of a common question that I have, although this is actually a bit backwards. Usually people ask me whether because, say, Grand Admiral Thrawn was brought back into canon, or because Star Wars Rebels recanonized an aspect of the EU, does that mean that everything associated with it is canon again? We also had Lando explicitly mention a few Star Wars Legend stories, and no, they are only canon to the degree to which they're actually mentioned in canon. So bringing one thing back doesn't open up the floodgates, or in this case, just because the first 6 seasons are Legends content does not mean that Season 7 of the Clone Wars is. And that is a little confusing, and it's probably something that could be done through some sort of sourcebook or something else, but I very much doubt they're going to go that route. Especially because more aspects of Season 7 will conflict with pre-existing material than was the case with Seasons 1 through 6. But that's all for now. Thank you for the great question. If you guys have one you'd like me to answer, leave it down below. Until next time though guys, this has been Eckhart's Ladder. May the Force be with you.